So our goal for this training is to make sure that I remember to share the screen. So that is the first thing that we're gonna do. And here we go. We are now presenting. Um, we're good. Thanks, Stacy. So our goal for this training, in addition to that, is, are we still good? Cool. Our goal for this training is to get you thinking about what in your own personal story motivates you to show up and fight these pipelines. By the end of tonight, you'll have the beginnings of a publishable letter to the editor that links your story to the fight against the MVP. And now's the time to do that. Now we must invite people to join us in actions against new fossil fuel infrastructure. And there are few better ways to do that than writing a letter to the editor. Opinion pieces are among the best read items of a newspaper and usually read by far more people than online commentaries. So before I go any further, I want to take 1 second to share some helpful norms and tips for the Zoom call. So we encourage everyone to join if you're able by computer, and as you feel comfortable to turn your camera on and engage in that way. But whether you're joining by computer, smartphone, or tablet, you should see this toolbar at the bottom of your screen. And you can mute and unmute yourself. So please be mindful of noise that may be around you and stay muted. You can shut off and start your video. You can click on participants to ensure that you have people's correct pronouns. And most importantly, we have the chat function. On your phone and possibly on your tablet, you may need to select the 3 dots adjacent to participants and then select chat to send a message. And on your toolbar on your computer all the way to the right, you can see reactions. During the Q&A or other opportunities to share, you can raise your hand so we know that you want to talk. I also love a good emoji, so feel free to use them to react to the presentation. If you're on a smartphone, you can find the reactions by clicking the 3 dots. For closed captioning, you can select the live caption script on the right-hand side of the toolbar on your computer. On your smartphone, you can click the 3 dots on your main screen, then click on meeting settings and turn it on. So now we'd like to hear from you. Please put in the chat your name, your pronouns, what city you're calling from, and your thought on becoming, or possibly if you already are, a published author. And you'll have the chance to share more in just a bit. Thank you, everybody. So tonight, as we've talked about, we're going to go through a section on what's happening with the Mountain Valley Pipeline and the Chickahominy Pipeline. And then we're going to talk about your story and connect it to those fights. And then we're going to get into some really tangible sections. We're going to talk about how to write an effective letter to the editor. We're going to look at an example and see what works and what didn't work. And then we're going to give you a chance to really work on yours. There will be a brainstorming session. We'll have opportunities for you to get feedback. And then we will even provide feedback on the feedback. We'll do some editing and quality control, some common mistakes and common tricks to really fix them. And then we will end with a really clear ask and clear next steps for getting this published. And so throughout the presentation, make sure you put your questions in the chat and we will have a discussion and make sure we answer them all at the end. So here are a few short briefers about these pipelines. The Mountain Valley Pipeline is an over 300-mile long pipeline running through West Virginia and Western Virginia, with a possible extension proposed through North Carolina. Already billions of dollars over budget and years over timeline, the company is attempting to secure the final permits it needs to finish the project. These are the Army Corps of Engineers Clean Water Permit number 401, and the DEQ Clean Water, the Army Corps is the 404, and then the DEQ Clean Water Permit number 401. And so I want to take a couple minutes and share a short video about the MVP. And can we see? Thanks, Stacy. And if you can't hear the sound, go ahead and stop me.
When you're organizing for a movement and you're just one person, it can become tiring and taxing and problematic. But when you're organizing and you're educating people, you're building a team to help them understand the real issue of the problem. It's like one arrow. It can become broken, tattered, torn. But when you have a bundle of arrows, that's very difficult to break. And so that's what I want to build, is a collective of arrows. We're going to be a bundle of arrows so that we can stand strong and organize together. And then when we have to call upon each other in a community, we don't have to relationship build, because right now a lot of this is building relationship. I want people to understand that I'm here, you can trust me, and I'm going to make this as important in my life as it is in your life.
We want to leave a lasting solidarity and unity between, the community that has risen up to do this one action and future actions on this pipeline. But once these companies see that we have a community that's strong between West Virginia and North Carolina, and if they go somewhere, neighboring, we will jump in and help those folks too. But if they see that we've come together and that we don't care if we have different thoughts about things, different politics, different beliefs, different colors, different genders, but we all agree on this one thing, that we deserve consultation and consent. And when we say no, it's no. They will handle us a lot differently. Let this be our strategy of coming together. Let this be our strategy. Children, women, men, elders, creator, community protected inside. They can't beat it, folks. We just haven't practiced it. They thought they taught us to forget how.
Thank you all for watching that with me. And something that I really enjoy about that offering is just that we can really see how important storytelling is. We can see how important collaboration is. We can see how important relationships are for making a better world and for fighting these pipelines. And those same themes are what we're going to talk about today. Can we all still see the presentation well? Okay, great. And so the next thing we want to do is talk about the Chickahominy pipeline. Now this is an over 80-mile proposed pipeline that would span 5 counties in central Virginia and impact homes, wetlands, and conservation protected land. The Chickahominy Pipeline Company has been doing some shady stuff. They recently attempted to subvert the State Corporation Commission's authority and sneak through with little regulation. Thankfully, the SCC hearing examiner has rejected this petition and recommended that the pipeline not be exempt from oversight, aka it actually has to go through the regulatory process. So your voice, particularly if you live in Charles City County or New Kent, could be really helpful for stopping this pipeline. Charles City has come out in favor of it, and we're not sure what New Kent is going to do at the moment. However, Henrico, Louisa, and Hanover have come out strongly against. So after thinking about the really tangible impacts of these 2 pipelines, we want to think a little bit about why are we working on this now? And in short, because it's long overdue. We need to stop all fossil fuel infrastructure and rapidly transition to clean energy. Our future can't have fracked gas pipelines, harmful compressor stations, or continued environmental injustices. And these 2 permits, the Army Corps 404 and the Virginia DEQ 401, are some of the last regulatory hoops that the MVP has to jump through. So if they're denied now, there's a much greater likelihood that this pipeline could be canceled. So we have a real shot at this moment. The 401 permit is what stopped the Penn East pipeline from being built in New Jersey earlier this year. In September, New Jersey's version of the DEQ denied this 401 permit, and shortly afterwards, the pipeline is canceled. So how are we going to get your stories into these papers? We're kind of skipping ahead a bit to assume that you've all shared your brilliant stories and gotten a beautifully crafted letter that's ready to go into the papers. So working backwards, that's all going to happen by December 6th or 10th. You'll be a published author by then. But in order for that to come to fruition, we have the bolded steps at the top that need to happen. So the first step, you're already well on your way. You're at the LTE training today on the 18th. And then we have about a week to draft the LTE, and then really spend another week really polishing it, and then send it to the papers no later than November 30th. And the reason that we have that timeline is because the papers can take up to a week and sometimes even longer to review and provide you feedback and actually publish the LTE. So we really want to make sure we give enough time. And the reason we even want to do this at all is because we're doing this at the same time as we are building up towards the State Water Control Board meeting on the 14th. And before that hearing, we're going to have art builds, we're going to have a vigil on the 11th, and we're going to have other ways that we can gather and continue building public opinion against the MVP. And that's really what this is about. This is about winning the battle of ideas and demonstrating to decision makers at the State Water Control Board and to our neighbors that we believe this pipeline is unnecessary, unpopular, and unconscionable. So now we're going to take a second to step back. Mustafa's going to guide us in what happened in your life to lead you to that conclusion against this pipeline.
So good evening again, and everybody. So wonderful to see all of you, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. So just to get us grounded in the pipeline fight that is immediately in front of us, it's important that we think about our own stories, particularly, people just connect with stories, values, and emotions, and are much more readily moved by them than facts. And so storytelling, otherwise known in organizing circles as public narrative, is an important part of organizing work. Actually, Stacy, would you mind pulling up the presentation?
Yeah, that's
Got it. Okay. Great. Thank you. So for context, there are three parts to public narrative. So the first part is the story of self. And the story of self communicates the values that called you to lead in this way, to come to this place and at this time. So each of us has compelling stories to tell. In some cases, our values have been shaped by choices others, maybe it's parents, maybe it's friends, teachers have made, and we have chosen how to deal with loss even as we have found access to hope. Our choices have shaped our own life path. We dealt with challenges as children, found our way to a calling, responded to needs, demands, and gifts of others, confronted leadership challenges in places of worship, schools, communities, and work. So that's the story of self. Number two, the story of us. A story of us communicates shared values that anchor community, values that may be at risk and may also be sources of hope. So we tell more stories of us in our daily lives than any other kind of story. Do you remember when moments at a family dinner? What about that time that moments after an exciting athletic event, or simply exchanging stories with friends? Just like any good story, stories of us recount moments when individuals, a group, a community, an organization, a nation, experienced a challenge, a choice, and an outcome expressive of shared values. So the key is to focus on telling specific stories about specific people at specific times that can remind everyone of or call everyone's attention to the values that you share against which challenges in the world can be measured. A story of us really is experiential. It's not that it creates an experience of shared values. It's really not categorical. We're not describing people by certain traits, characteristics, or identity markers. A number, I think just as a great example, in the video that Sander showed the metaphor of talking about being a group of arrows, being a bundle of arrows, and the story that subsequently was articulated about the community coming together. It's such a powerful story of us moment. The story of now communicates an urgent challenge. You're calling on your community to join you in acting now. So a story of now requires telling stories that bring the urgency of the challenge you face alive. That's urgent because of a need for change that cannot be denied. Urgent because of a moment of opportunity to make change that simply may not return, particularly as we are in the case with the Mountain Valley Pipeline. This is our time to make the change and to shut it down. At the intersection of this urgency of the challenge and the promise of hope is a choice that must be made, to act or not to act. And all of you have made a choice to show up tonight with the intention of acting. And that's where the hope resides. The hope resides in the possibility and in the pathway to action. You all came to this training because you could see that there was a pathway to stopping the Mountain Valley Pipeline, and that this was going to be a meaningful and hopefully effective way for doing that. So on to the next slide. Just a little bit more of why we use public narrative. So Stacy, if you could go ahead and drop our questions here into the chat. But so leadership requires engaging the head and the heart to engage the hands, mobilizing others to act together purposefully. Leaders engage people in interpreting why they should change their world, their motivation, and how they can change it, which is their strategy. So public narrative is the why part. It's the art of translating values into action through stories. So the key really is motivation. It's motivation to the key to motivation is really understanding the values that inspire action through emotion. And emotions inform us of what we value in ourselves, in others, and in the world, and enable us to express the motivational content of our values to others. So some emotions inhibit action, but other emotions facilitate action. And the language of emotion is the language of movement. Mindful action is inhibited by things like inertia and apathy on the one hand, and fear and isolation and self-doubt on the other. And it can be facilitated by urgency and anger on the one hand, and hope, solidarity, and you can make a difference attitude on the other. So stories can mobilize emotions, enabling mindful action to overcome emotions that inhibit it. So so we've put a couple of questions in the chat box for you to think about, and you can also take a moment to respond to. But yeah, what values drive you to stop fossil fuels, and what emotions do these values make you feel? No pressure to answer, but want to give folks a moment. If you would like to respond, you can also take yourself off mute if you if you would like to share. What values drive you to stop fossil fuels? I can share an example from my perspective, and as from my own perspective, I know as someone who's an American Egyptian Muslim and whose identity straddles a number of worlds geographically. I know what it's like. You know, I've heard we've been Egypt, my father's country of Egypt has been deeply impacted by colonialism over the generations, and the marginalization of people, and the extraction of land and literally of ancient property. To me, this is an intrinsic part of this fight around the pipeline. It's a fight that goes back to indigenous justice, and is deeply connected to people's rights to be on their land, and to maintain the property that is communally theirs. So would encourage folks to think about those questions. So we can go to the next slide. So just to concisely define leadership, I want to borrow Professor Marshall Ganz's definition. Leadership is accepting responsibility for enabling others to achieve shared purpose in the face of uncertainty. So narrative is how we learn to access the moral resources, the courage to make the choices that shape our identities as individuals, as communities, as nations. And so we all want you to be leaders, and this is an opportunity to do that. So we've put into the chat box just another question for folks to think about as we move forward with this, is how do you define leadership? And then we can move on to the next slide. So there, in the formula, and thinking about your own story, there are three key elements of a public narrative structure: challenge and choice and outcome. And so a plot begins with an unexpected challenge that confronts a character with an urgent need to pay attention, to make a choice probably for whom they are just unprepared. And the choice yields an outcome that teaches a moral. Because we can empathetically identify with the character, we can feel the moral. We not only hear about someone's courage, we are also inspired by it. So the story of the character and their effort to make choices encourages listeners to think about their own values and challenges, and inspires them with new ways of thinking about how to make choices in their own lives. So incorporating challenge, choice, and outcome into your own story, as a part of that, there are some key questions that you need to answer as you consider the choices you've made in your life and the path that you've taken that's brought you to this point in time as a leader. Once you identify the specific relevant choice points, perhaps your first true experience of community in the face of a challenge, or your choice to do something about injustice for the first time, you can dig deeper by answering some of these questions. Why did you feel it was a challenge? What was so challenging about it? Why was it your challenge? Why did you make the choice you did? Where did you get the courage or not? Where did you get the hope or not? Did your parents or grandparents' life stories teach you in any way on how to act in this moment? And how did it feel? And then on the outcome, how did the outcome feel? Why did it feel that way? What did it teach you? What do you want to teach us? And how do you want us to feel? So I'm going to just demonstrate a story, a brief version of my story of self. And then we are going to move into doing some reflections on our own story, on our own stories. So shortly after September 11th, I remember standing at center court. I'm looking around at the bleachers. They're filled with fans. I'm a starter on the 8th grade basketball team, and I felt like every game was so important. The music starts to play. Doo-doot, doo-doot. Doo-doot, doo-doot. My heart starts beating heavy. The whistle blows. The referee yells, "Jump ball." And so I tap the ball to a teammate and I run down the court next to the basket. I'm posting up next to the basket and I'm yelling at my teammates, "Pass the ball, pass the ball." And I'm posting up and I keep on getting hit so hard. 1, 2, 3 times. The entire first half, I'm getting hit and pushed. And it's the end of the first half. I approach the referee in front of my coach and I politely say, Ref, where are the calls? Shut up, you big monkey. Time slows down. My coach, who is a large man, immediately steps up and gets in the referee's face, defending me and letting him know exactly what he thinks of him. The referee ejects my coach from the game. My basketball coach was the first one to stand up for me in a post 9/11 world. Years later, I was at a rally calling on Bank of America to cap interest rates on credit cards and loans at 10%. I was walking up to the stage and approached the mic stand. I looked across the crowd of all different stripes and backgrounds. My heart was racing, not because of the hundreds of people that were there, but because this was literally the first time I was actually being publicly Muslim and standing up for my values. I took the mic because I didn't want there to be any more 8th grade Mustafas, because I wanted the CEO of Bank of America to hear that Muslim communities across North Carolina were standing with people that were being taken advantage of. And with that, I helped rally our people to line up outside of the bank with hundreds of pennies to deposit one by one by one until bank leadership met with us. I was transformed by that experience. I had finally been given the tools and the confidence to be like my coach and to stand up to those who are abusing their power. And that's the reason why I'm here today. I'm so excited about this training and for all of us to encourage each other to find our voices and to lean into the power we all have to affect real change. So this is your time to think about your own stories. So we're going to spend a little time doing that. We're going to invite folks to take 5 minutes to start sketching out just your own story and just really noting the significant experiences that you've had. If Stacy or Xander, if you could pop into the chat that's the template for worksheet. We have a worksheet that may be helpful to you where you can write some notes to yourself and start sketching it out. But we'll take 5 minutes to do that. And then we're going to come back together for like 2 minutes, 2-3 minutes. And if there are 1 or 2 people that would like to just share a couple of highlights from their reflection, that would be amazing. And afterwards, we're going to explicitly focus on writing and submitting your LTEs, and hopefully laying the groundwork of your own story, you'll be able to infuse it and really personalize your own LTE. We'll take 5 minutes. We'll see you back. We'll come back then at 7:39. But feel free to ask us any questions. Stacy, or I think it was Stacy, if you want to play some music for a few minutes.
Sure, sounds great.
Maybe in 10 years, you'll call me on the telephone, wondering if I'm all alone. Remember how we knew each other in 10 years? Everyone's been down the line, and we've all ended up fine. But I no longer know your number. I used to love you like the world lived. I used to love you like a child. The thing about people is they change when they walk away. You used to talk real slow about the things no one knows. I hate when people bring flowers trapped in glass. Their final hour and life rolls. It's all so fast until it slows. We cried that night in the car. Realize we let go.
Stacy,
Used to love
let
you.
me turn down the thank you so much. Folks can just wrap up in the next 20 seconds here. Wrap up your final thoughts. And great. So wanted to invite maybe one or two folks just to share like experiential, like if there was an experiential moment that you identified. Certain, like, you know, we'll just take a like literally a minute to do that. Yeah, in terms of your own story and what's brought you to fight against these pipelines. Anybody would like to share? Or what's brought you into doing this type of work, activism?
I
Anyone?
can try.
Yeah, go. This
Okay.
is, you don't have to have a perfect story. There's not a perfect story time, right? Like this is, everything is just about leaning into the experience that you've had. But please.
I mean, all right, these aren't necessarily stories about why I originally wanted to be concerned about this, but they're ones I think might work. I mean, Xander knows this, but several months ago, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And, you know, I'm still in treatment. And I know there's no reason that statistically, that I should have it. I don't really have any risk factors. It doesn't run in the family, etc. And I know that environmental exposures to certain toxins can increase people's risk for cancer. And pipelines, and especially some of the transfer stations, can emit a lot of harmful chemicals. And I could tell a little bit of my story about, you know, what it's like to get news like I got, and how I wouldn't want that to happen to somebody else unnecessarily because of pollution from a pipeline.
Yeah, I'm sure that's hard news, Erica, and it's you know, it's both courageous and powerful for you to share that and to name that, and I think that's certainly absolutely spot on, and deeply personal. Thank you Thank
Of
you.
course. No
Um,
problem. Thank you.
Anybody else wanna share? One more person? All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and move into yeah, absolutely. So powerful again. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Erica. Um why don't we go ahead and move into talking about the LTEs work into that, go into that section of the workshop. I think it just to be clear, the connection here is sometimes it can be really powerful to include a personal piece into a short LTE, even if it's just a reference. And so hopefully the time set aside to think about your experiences that have brought you here maybe got you thinking, oh, right, like that's something I might want to mention. And so I'm going to pass it to my colleague Stacy to talk through the structure and process for writing LTEs. Stacy.
Thanks, Mustafa. Yeah, I'm going to be talking to you guys about your LTE structure. So my advice would be, there are 4 elements that usually make up a great LTE. So number 1, you must have a hook. So you should almost always cite an article or an op-ed about the issue that you want to write about. Newspaper editors will often select those LTEs that are responding to a story in that newspaper. So that's important. Number 2, you want to state the problem very clearly. So explain what the article you're responding to is missing, what that article gets wrong, or present a new perspective that you're bringing to the issue. Step 3, you want to provide some evidence. So typically 1 to 2 facts will suffice, or you can use your personal story to back up your view. And number 4, you want to provide a clear solution or a call to action that addresses the problem. So you shouldn't feel like you need to follow this formula exactly. You typically want to include all of these elements in your LTE, but they don't necessarily have to go in that order, except for the hook. The hook should come early in your LTE. Okay, next slide. Before you write any LTE, you want to take a little time to plan and to strategize. So there are 3 questions you should ask yourself to guide that process. Number 1, you want to ask, what is your goal? So what do you want the readers to think and feel while they're reading your LTE? And what do you want them to do once they've read it? So addressing this question will be your call to action. For this Mountain Valley Pipeline work, we want to ask people to attend the violation vigil and to make their voices heard at the upcoming Water Control Board hearing. Question number 2 is, who is your primary audience? So, and who are the secondary audiences? So our primary audience are the people who would be fired up about this issue. Our secondary audience are members of the Water Control Board. They do not like to be lobbied directly, so we want to make sure that they see and hear about this issue through these letters to the editor that you're going to be writing. The third question is kind of based on your answer to the second question, which is, what arguments do you think will be the most persuasive to your audience? And not necessarily which arguments would be the most persuasive for people like you. We have people from a lot of different backgrounds, and anyone can be a pipeline fighter. So ask yourself, what will motivate them to take action? And then lastly, you should know the maximum length of your LTE, and you can find that guidance on each newspaper's website. We're going to be putting in a chat messaging document with talking points about the MVP that might be helpful as you craft your letters. So let's just go, really quickly through what are some of the arguments and messaging points about the MVP that we think would be helpful. So number 1, no one needs MVP's dirty gas. Only 35.5% of MVP's gas capacity has been secured by 4 current MVP customers that are affiliates of companies that own the pipeline through its joint venture. And it's possible that some of that gas might be sold overseas, which will benefit their corporate shareholders, but our communities will face the environmental risks. So, lack of need was one of the reasons why former FERC Commissioner Cheryl LaFleur voted to reject the MVP in 2017. There's clearly not a need. So that could be a talking point for you as you go ahead and craft your counter argument. What other talking points? Yeah, number 2 would be MVP is an environmental disaster. To date, it has racked up over 300 water quality violations. No pipeline of this size follows a steep of slopes and high landslide risk areas, which is over 200 miles. So the pipeline also poses a risk for several endangered species. And all of this, thank you. Thank you for putting that in the chat. All of these facts and data will be in the talking points guide that we're going to put in the chat. In North Carolina, officials were cautious and denied the MVP a water quality permit that was necessary to build the Southgate extension. Third talking point you might want to use is that the greenhouse gases generated by the MVP are extremely high. The MVP main line would generate almost 90 million metric tons annually, the equivalent of 23 coal plants. And lastly, the MVP costs have ballooned from 3.5 to 6.6 billion. And these costs would likely be passed on to customers. So that's you, the ratepayers. Additionally, MVP is not paying its bills. The MVP's construction contractor recently sued the pipeline owners, claiming that these cost overruns are being caused by delays, are a result of the pipeline's poor planning and management and legal violations. So those are some talking points you might want to keep in mind as you craft your LTE. But let's talk about framing your argument. So in the first paragraph, you want to cite the article or the issue that you're responding to, and then you kind of want to make your case and write a thesis statement. When making your case, ask yourself as you're writing, why does this topic matter? Why it matters today, urgently, why the reader should care about what you have to say. And, you can mention that this topic is particularly urgent because the Water Control Board Commission has the authority on December 14th to stop the building of this pipeline, which, the pipeline, we all know, would be disastrous for the environment and for our climate. So keep that in mind as you're crafting your argument in the very first few sentences of your LTE. You also want to include a clear call to action so what can be done to stop the building of the MVP? In this case, we want to ask the Water Control Board to not grant the 401 permit. Okay. Yes, you anticipating and refuting counter arguments. You might also want to anticipate the counterpoints that other people might bring up, and include a sentence or two acknowledging that the opposing view and explain why they're wrong. So you might say something like, supporters of the pipeline say that we need this in order to become energy independent and not rely on importing fossil fuels from other companies. But you can just use the facts in the talking point guide to show that actually we don't need this gas. And in fact, it might be exported overseas, which will benefit, customers who will buy that in other countries, but it's not going to benefit us in Virginia at all. Okay. Next, I want to mention using data. So Mustafa gave us a great training on how to use your story and your story of self and the story of us Storytelling is extremely valuable and helpful for crafting an LTE. Additionally, though, it is helpful to use data and data that really stands out to support your arguments. So, but you don't want to overdo it. 2 or 3 data points usually is enough. You don't need to include formal citations in your LTE, but you should mention the source if you can. So if I was writing an LTE, I would say something like, the United Nations IPCC says, we have 10 years to keep warming within 1.5 degrees Celsius, for example. So I mentioned the source. I don't need, a formal citation, but you should be prepared to cite the source in case the LTE editor asks for one. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Yeah, you should definitely connect your LTE to your story. Your story is powerful and readers like authenticity. So you want to write your story from the heart. If you can use part of a sentence to convey something personal, your LTE will be stronger. So I can give like a brief story of self of something that I might include if I were writing an LTE about the Mountain Valley Pipeline. So I would say something like, growing up, my family would hike through the Appalachian Trail every summer. We loved to sit by the water. We would go for a swim, sometimes maybe fishing. And the Mountain Valley Pipeline threatens those bodies of water. The pipeline will run across hundreds of streams and rivers, up and down steep slopes that are prone to erosion and landslides. Its construction would result in enormous volumes of sediment dumped into these water bodies, potentially threatening water quality and aquatic life. I cherish my memories on the Appalachian Trail in Virginia because they helped me appreciate the natural world, and I want my children to grow up enjoying those same activities. So, if you can spare more space or even a whole paragraph without exceeding the word count, definitely tell your story. And if you can, make that as long as possible. Okay, so let's talk about focusing on the positives in your LTE. Your LTE is a sales document. You are selling the ideas to the readers of this newspaper, which, most of the newspapers have a really wide audience. So you want to try to keep it as positive as possible. You don't need to overemphasize the ill effects of a warming planet or the specific negative impacts of fracking, fossil fuels, etc. But you do want to focus on the hope and the need and the opportunity to act now. So instead, I'd recommend emphasizing the societal, economic, and health benefits of transitioning toward a carbon-free society, of getting good, high-quality paying jobs and clean energy, improving public health because of reduced pollution, more stable energy supplies, and the peace of mind that we are working to repair and protect our environment. So just keep it positive. Okay, yeah, and some tips on language and tone. You don't want to rant or disparage, but you can use lively, punchy language that evokes feeling in your readers, but you want to come across as reasonable and sensible. And secondly, I would suggest pretend like you're writing for someone who cares about the climate, but isn't active in the fight against the MVP. So your LTE could be the jumping off point for someone who is concerned about the pipeline, or is concerned about the climate, but hasn't quite connected the dots between, I'm upset about this pipeline, but I don't know what to do about it. Your LTE could inspire them to, okay, let's show up to the MVP violation vigil, or let's show up at the Water Control Board hearing to testify. You want to write short sentences and short paragraphs using plain language, avoid jargon and cliches. You can use some metaphors. Metaphors can be effective. I'd say, only use 1, maybe 2, but no more than that. You don't want to overdo it. And I think that's it from me on LTE structure. I'll pass it off to Xander, but thanks, and happy to take any questions. Feel free to put your questions in the chat.
Cool. While you all think of questions, I will go to the section that I call grab bag of LTE things that they had Xander tell to you all. So here is some things to consider when really making this thing a reality. So for a headline, it should convey your viewpoint and what the LTE is about. It can be, wordplay can be effective, but don't get too cute. This is something I really struggle with, but it should not sound like a dad joke despite everything inside of me. And short headlines are better than long ones. I aim for 5 words. Sometimes I have to go longer. A good tip is to look at some of the longer LTE headlines that are in the newspaper you're targeting and make sure you don't go any longer than what's already been published. And these are good because you want to make the newspaper's job as easy as possible for them. So give them everything that you can, including a headline, knowing that they may change it regardless. Sometimes they like to write their own headlines. So another way to make the job as easy as possible is to follow the Associated Press citation style. To really triple check your LTE for accuracy, going through each sentence and really scrutinizing it and say, is this true? And to shorten any lengthy sentences, even if you're already in the word limit. Be short, be punchy, be clear. And another thing to do is to go ahead and check spelling, punctuation, and grammar. And this is the one that I think really captures everything else, is to have a friend or colleague read your letter and provide any feedback. It's really close to impossible for even professional writers to do a good job editing their own work. And if you're looking for someone to review your LTE, you have 4 new best friends that you could connect with over the next couple of weeks to have a little writing club together. And CCAN could help make snacks and make Zoom hosts to make that thing a reality if you all want to have some fun with it. So continuing the grab bag of tips, shorter is better. Double check the newspaper that you are targeting and don't go any longer than anything they've already published. The same advice as for the headline. And research the topic you're writing about. Even if you think you're already well informed, there's always something new out there. And taking a second look at even old information can give you a new way to present it. And increase your credibility. You can, and this is why we had the story of self-training and that reflection sheet alongside of this training. Erica's story about personal impacts is incredibly powerful and is a good way to share personal, and we can also share our professional lives into this too. People that deal with the health impacts, whether they're nurses, first responders, firefighters, community health workers, and social workers. If that is your profession, you can link that into LTE because that gives you more credibility to talk about the health impacts of climate change. Just like I would be more likely to listen to a water quality analysis from a biologist. And make sure you end with a punch. State the call to action and, if possible and necessary, circle back to your own story. So this slide is also here because we are going to print out these slides and we have some more resources for you. I'm actually going to go ahead and see if we can put these links in the MVP messaging document too, so everything is in the same place. But these are some more resources for you as well. And I didn't see any questions come up in the chat, but I want to take space here and then Mustafa can answer anything and then he will wrap us up.
Well, we'll do the Q&A and then we're gonna invite folks to do some, to spend a little time together to start crafting or sketching out an LTE. And thanks to y'all for sticking with us. Any questions that folks have? Okay. All right. We've solved all the world's problems as far as I'm concerned. All the world's problems. So we want to invite folks. To actually just take about 10 minutes or so right now to conceptualize and plan your letter to the editor. So we'll take 10 minutes to do that. Going to invite folks to, maybe we could split people up into see, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So we could split people up into 2 groups, maybe 1 room, and then we can just keep 2 in another in the room here. You can use, what I would do is I would just start thinking about those key pieces. You want to have the hook. You want to think about your personal story. You want to think about the data and the action that we're asking for folks to take, which the action is we want for the Water Control Board hearing or commission to deny the 401 permit. Additionally, we mentioned briefly before that for folks who may be in the central part of the state, particularly thinking about Charles City County and New Kent. If you've got some connection there or a relationship to those places, Charles City County has actually come out for the Chickahominy pipeline, and the Charles City County Board of Supervisors. The New Kent Board of Supervisors hasn't said anything either way. The other 3 counties in which it's running through have all come out in opposition. So there is local leadership that's really fiercely opposed to this. So if you have a connection there and you would like to write about that, you can certainly do that. Otherwise, our focus is MPP. Great. Yes.
Mustafa, we got a good question in the chat. Oh, wait, no, Stacey answered it. Never mind.
Great. Yes.
I just saw it.
And I guess the other thing I can note is that at the top of the messaging document, there's a link from our partners at Virginia Organizing that has a page with all of the print news media across the state and links to each of those newspapers' instructions for submitting an LTE. So, particularly as a part of the hook, you want to be reacting to something that was written previously in the newspaper at some point about the pipeline. So let's take 10 minutes right now, and folks can just start sketching it out. Steve, should I do the breakout rooms?
I think it may be nice to have people here, and we can do music again, and then we can do breakout for feedback.
That's great.
So we can stay here and then go after that.
Yeah, and encourage folks to take the 10 minutes right now to start sketching it out, and then our next thing here is just we're going to think through just how to support each other in getting our letters to the editor done. So we'll come back at about by 8:18. Let's give it 11 minutes.
protected for so long, or the mercy in your sense of right and wrong. It's not your hand searching slow in the dark, or your nails or your love's watermark. It's not the way you talk me off the road. Your questions like directions to the truth. It's knowing that this can't go on forever. Likely one of us will have to spend some days alone. Maybe we'll get 40 years together, but one day I'll be gone. One day you'll be gone. If we were vampires and death was a joke, we'd go out on the sidewalk in the smoke, laugh at all the lovers and their plans. I wouldn't feel the need to hold your hand. Maybe time running out as a gift. I'll work hard till the end of my shift. Give you every second I can find. And hope it isn't me who's left behind. It's knowing that this can't go on forever. Likely one of us will have to spend some days alone. Maybe we'll get 40 years together. One day I'll be gone. One day you'll be gone. It's knowing that this can't go on forever. Likely one of us will have to spend some days alone. Maybe we'll get 40 years together. One day I'll be gone. One day you'll be There are no wrong roads and no window stays closed, and love is always sad when it fades. But glass is better stained anyways. If never you find what you're looking for, come on back to the front porch. Say my name through the screen door. Come on back to the front porch. Whatever you've done, it doesn't matter. It's done in the roll, a little splintered and battered, but the light is on. What you waiting for? Come on back. Come on back to the front. time's on yours and mine. Ain't gonna worry where you are, who you're with. Let's just agree, this is it. Point me, how it is. Leave your bags in the car, keep it running. I won't pretend that I won't miss this. Point me, how it is. And I don't wanna know, I don't wanna know. See, I'm just saving us some trouble somewhere down the line. This kind of town you just leave behind. Since you don't know it yet, but you won't come back. And I ain't going nowhere, you know that. What we made, how it is. Leave your bags in the car, keep it running. Won't pretend that I won't miss this. What we made, how it is. And you can go ahead and hate me, that's just fine. It doesn't matter either way, I'm right. What we made, how it is. Leave your bags in the car, keep it running. Won't pretend that I won't miss this. What we made, how it is. What we made, how it is.
Okay, start wrapping up your thoughts. Great. So hope that time was helpful for folks. Sorry, give me a second here. Yeah, how was that exercise? Thinking through, planning, strategizing for the LTE. How was that? Let me see. Let's start calling on folks. Robbie, how was that process for you? You are muted if you're trying to speak. Or Michael or Erica. Oh,
Oh,
yeah, I see Robbie. It's hard to connect with the pipeline far away from in Virginia Beach. Totally get that. May I ask, Robbie, why do you care about this pipeline fight? I think that's a you know, a question to think, yeah, to think about it is, even though you're far away, right there are ways in which this pipeline fight impacts you. Yeah, and I wonder, Robbie, I know you're super, and we haven't had the chance to actually do a one-on-one yet. I know that you're super passionate about water issues, resiliency issues, environmental issues. So think about, you know, what experiences have moved you to be a part of this, and I suspect that there are connections to the pipeline. I don't want to assume, but I suspect. Erica, I'm sorry, I think you unmuted yourself. Would you have what would you like to share?
Oh, you said my name, so I did, but
Oh, yeah, I did.
yes. So I mean, I guess I'm still working on it. I found an article that I can use to tie in, so I'm working on a plausible tie-in where it looks like I'm responding to their article and not like roaring along with this thing I already wanted to say, even though that is what I'm doing. So I was just doing some light Googling, looking for facts. The article I was going to use is the Arlington County Board just declined to declare a climate emergency. I'm going to try to segue into, well, here's too bad they didn't do anything. Here's something we can all do. Here's why it's Arlington relevant, like tie in a health thing and be like with a couple statistics, and then maybe try to find a way to tie my story in, because I tend to be very facts oriented, and I'm almost frustrated that that's not enough. But if there's enough space, I'll try to tie in a little like of what I was saying before.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, that's basically where I am.
And Erica, I think you said it so succinctly, like your story before, and it was so powerful. All right, to me, it's like such a great example of personal story and touch. If you feel comfortable sharing it in that way, in a more public way, in a print newspaper.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if it works, it's just a matter of making it all fit together in a way that seems natural.
Absolutely, and not to say that you have to do that, but I think it's a great example in theory, right, of just the conciseness, right, like the conciseness and effectiveness, which is great. So any other folks want to share how the exercise was for them? And no pressure, but want to make sure maybe folks were gathering their thoughts. Are there any other questions that I missed or comments in the chat that we wanted to respond to? Stacy, Xander?
Well, this is Michael. I just want to thank you guys for the presentation. I'm a member of the Sierra Club, but I'm a disabled American veteran, so I can't, my hands are not as good as it was when I was on active duty, though. You know, because of my disability, I couldn't kind of tell you what our view is with the Sierra Club about the pipeline, but we are very active about it. And I appreciate the marvelous work you guys did. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it reminds me that, you know, it's just because it's just the four amazing volunteers on the call. If any of you like want help in the next few days, like before Thanksgiving, to help like writing, reviewing, you know, even if you've got like, you know, if they're you know, even if you've got like a computer issue that comes up and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm having trouble writing this thing, and I can't like, you know, I'm having trouble submitting it to the LTE. We'll send a follow-up email probably in the morning tomorrow, and you can feel free to like email, connect with us, and we'll you know, happy to, for the 4 of you all, review LTEs and or just help get them written. Thank you so much for sharing that, Michael.
Welcome.
And so, so yeah, we wanted to just remind folks about the timeline here. I think Xander mentioned this earlier. The next thing after these letters to the editor that we're building towards is our the violation vigil that CCAN has been a supporter of. There are a lot of organizations that have been frontline organizations doing work in the western part of the state that have been leading this fight. We're coming in and supporting and helping to recruit more people. And so the violation vigil is going to be on December 11th at 1 p.m. In Richmond. So we're Stacy just put the link into the chat, and don't worry, all these links, the important things are going to be included in a follow-up. So if you're nervous about missing something, don't worry about it. But it's really super important that if you want to go, or if you think that you might be going to this vigil, to like RSVP as soon as possible. Xander, I believe, mentioned that we have a goal of 300 RSVPs for this. And right now we have 160 some odd people that have RSVP'd for it. So we're hopefully on our way to hitting that goal. But part of the reason why it's important to RSVP early is that organizers like Xander are putting together regional art builds that are going to be happening primarily in the first 9 or 10 days of December, leading up to the violation vigil. And at these art builds, they're going to be putting together literally the art for the action, and it's all going to be demonstrations of the violations, the permit violations that MVP has committed. So really just encourage you to RSVP, even if you're not 100% sure. So make sure that you get the information as soon as it comes out about the regional art builds. And secondarily, really would urge you to share that link out with your friends, family, people that you know, people that maybe you don't talk to about climate all the time, but you think that they're sympathetic to climate. Like, this is the time to act. This is the time to be showing up in solidarity. All of you know the election outcome in Virginia, and elections aren't everything. But what we do know is that come July, there's going to be a handful of new members of this water control board that are appointed by the our governor-elect, blank out on his name right now, but it's a long day, but the governor-elect of Virginia. And we don't have any indication that these folks are going to be as sympathetic, right, to climate and the environment as the people that are currently on the board. So our window to act is now, and the Equitrans, the parent company, is in a tough position, is really in the hole in terms of money, and we just want to run the clock out on them and get them to shut this thing down.